All right. Welcome to the Newsmax Daily for Thursday, May 30th, 2024. It's the 151st day of the year, the 22nd Thursday of the year, and it is a potentially historic day in the U.S. of A. The day a former president of the United States, for the first time ever, could be found guilty in a court of law for committing a crime and potentially be sentenced to prison time. Back in 1872, President Ulysses S. Grant was said to have been arrested for speeding on his horse, which would make him the only U.S. president to have been arrested while in office, if the history is correct. The jury, weighing 34 felony counts now of falsifying business records that prosecutors say Trump used to conceal that $130,000 payment to porno star Stormy Daniels to keep her story from going to voters before the 2016 election. So yesterday, the jury was given a laptop with 300 pieces of evidence that had been presented during the case to take into deliberations. Okay, they paused twice, day one of deliberations. Once to ask to rehear some testimony from Michael Cohen and David Pecker. Pecker, you may remember, is the former National Enquirer publisher. And then a second time they paused to ask the judge to reread some of his jury instructions. So a verdict could literally happen at any minute. Could be minutes, could be hours, could be days. I guess it could even be weeks. Who knows? It may even happen, though, before you had a chance to listen to this podcast. But we'll get to some of the legal facts in a moment with veteran attorney and Newsmax host Greta Van Susteren. First, Donald Trump spoke outside of the courtroom yesterday, as he has done every day since the trial started. And since you may have heard bits and pieces of it on different shows, I'm playing the entire thing.
Very much. I would say, in listening to the charges from the judge, who's, as you know, very conflicted and corrupt, because of the confliction, very, very corrupt. Mother Teresa could not beat these charges. These charges are rigged. The whole thing is rigged. The whole country's a mess between the borders and fake elections, and you have a trial like this where the judge is so conflicted he can't breathe. He's got to do his job, and it's not for me, that I can tell you. It's a disgrace, and I mean that. Mother Teresa could not beat those charges, but we'll see. We'll see how we do. It's a very disgraceful situation. Every single legal scholar and expert said this is no case. It shouldn't be brought, and it certainly could have been brought 7 years ago, not in the middle of a presidential election. It was all done by Joe Biden. This judge contributed to Joe Biden, and far worse than that, but I'm not allowed to talk about it because I have a gag order. Far worse than that, by 1,000 times worse than that. The worst I've ever heard, but I can't talk about it. It'll be talked about, but I'm not allowed to talk about it. But it'll be talked about in the history books. What's happening here is weaponization at a level that nobody's seen before, ever. And it shouldn't be allowed to happen. So I'll stay around here. This is 5 weeks. And 5 weeks of really essentially not campaigning, although I took a big lead in the polls over the last few weeks. Something's going on. Because I think the people of this country see that this is a rigged deal. It's a weaponized deal for the Democrats to hit their political opponent. For Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of the United States. He's destroying our country. He's letting millions of people from jails, from prisons, from insane asylums, from mental institutions. Drug dealers pour in. Venezuela, if you look at their crime statistics, they've gone down 72% in crime because they're releasing all their criminals into our country because of this horrible president that we have. And then they have a protest of Robert De Niro yesterday. He's a fool. He's a broken down fool standing out there, and he got maggot. He got maggot yesterday. He got a big dose of it. But I just want to say it's a very unfair trial. It should have never happened. If it was going to happen, it should have happened 7 years ago. As you know, Bragg didn't want to bring it. The Southern District didn't bring it. The FEC didn't bring it. This judge didn't even let us use the #1 election attorney. He's making the rules. He doesn't know anything about elections. He doesn't know anything about voting and vote counts. He doesn't know anything about this stuff. That's not his profession. We had the leading election expert in the country, Brad Schmitt, ready to testify. Wouldn't let him do it. They wouldn't let another gentleman who represented, and you know very well, you saw it. It was the worst I think I've ever seen anyone treated on the stand. Bob Costello wouldn't let him talk about all of the hundreds of emails that he was sent by a gentleman, another gentleman, who I can't mention because I'm gagged. Every time I speak to you, you ask me simple questions. I'm not allowed to give you the answer because I'm gagged by this judge. But we have a very, very serious problem here. I mean, our country's going bad. And remember, and let me just leave you with this. This is all because of Joe Biden and I don't even think it's him. I don't think he's smart enough to think about it. But it's the people that surround him in the office. They're smart. They're fascists, they're communists, but they're smart. And they're ruining our country. But we're going to win this election. November 5th is going to be the most important day in the history of our country. We're going to take back our country from these fascists and these thugs that are destroying us with inflation and with everything they do, how stupid they are, allowing 15, 16, 17 million people into our country, totally unvetted, totally unchecked. We're going to bring back our nation November 5th. Remember, most important day in the history of our country. In the meantime, this trial is rigged. Thank you.
Donald Trump saying a lot that he says he can't say because of the gag order, and getting a campaign speech in there as well. This is Greta Van Susteren on with Carl Higbie.
So, Greta, what's your take on this whole scenario, start to finish? Have they presented a case? Is it even a case from the get-go? And how have they strung it along this long?
All right. First of all, I wasn't in the courtroom, so I don't know what the evidence was presented. Having said that, though, let's not forget that Stormy Daniels is the one who tried to get money out of Trump through David Pecker, and there was a threat that if he didn't pay, she was going to go public. That's called extortion. She was never charged. Then the case went to the Federal Elections Commission at some point, and they declined to do a civil penalty to Trump. Then it went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, Southern District of New York. They examined the case, investigated. They declined to prosecute. Then it went to the DA's office, to Alvin Bragg's predecessor, to see if he wanted to prosecute. He investigated the predecessor, determined that there was no case there to prosecute. So then Alvin Bragg comes into office saying he's going to, basically get Trump. But he looks at the case. He declines to prosecute. But then sometime later, he's convinced by someone in his office that he's going to prosecute. So there we are. We're in court. So then Trump gets tried in this indictment, which I have to tell you, I still don't understand how it stands constitutional muster. For the life of me, I can't figure out what Trump was charged with. I got the misdemeanors that have been expired by the statute of limitations, but there's so much more to an indictment, which means you have to inform specifically what he's charged with, and that was not identified. So then we go into opening statements, and the prosecutor says for the first time that the records were falsified in order to commit a crime to influence the election. Well, that's what every politician does, tries to influence an election. It can't possibly be a crime.
Well,
so
Greta,
during the course,
real quick right there, they wouldn't let Trump's election expert testify, and that's the hinge of their whole case.
Well, that was later on. I didn't even get to that. Look, and I guess I'm getting down in the weeds for you, but I got to tell you, Carlos, I taught evidence as an adjunct professor at Georgetown Law School, and I would give Judge Juan Merchan and the prosecutors an F for the outrageous introduction of evidence of Stormy Daniels, where she described the sexual positions of the former President Trump and what he was wearing. That had nothing to do with whether records were falsified. It had nothing to do with the influencing an election. It had everything to do with trying to poison the jurors against the president. They knew better. They all knew better. And there's a specific rule which says where the prejudicial impact greatly outweighs the probative value, whether the probative value means what it tends to prove, that it should not be allowed. Well, Judge Merchan didn't care. He didn't care at all, and he allowed it in. Shame on him. He knows better. So anyway, I can go through so many elements of this case from a legal standpoint. I wasn't in the courtroom for the evidence, but even before you get to any case, the law's got to be fair. And we go into this case with a very uneven playing field.
So there you go. from a very experienced attorney and one-time Georgetown professor, Greta Van Susteren, who hosts The Record with Greta, 6 o'clock Eastern here on Newsmax. Lara Trump has been in the courtroom with much of the Trump family in support of the former president. She spoke about it with Greg Kelly.
Tell us what it's like from that perspective. I mean, we've been watching Donald Trump in that hallway, for 6 weeks right now. What is it like from the other side? Is there, I don't know, is there anything special about it? It seems like there is.
Well, listen, it's just incredible to watch a man who, Greg, has been so maligned, so attacked, really from the day he came down the escalator in Trump Tower in 2015 and announced he was running for president as a Republican, to see him not only taking, all that he has had, all the incoming, but still standing and still fighting. And I think that's the really amazing thing. I got to sit yesterday in the front row of that courthouse and sit right behind my father-in-law there and listen to the hours and hours on end of the prosecution trying to wrap up the case and trying to make their case desperately for this jury, of course, with no evidence, with nothing that points to him at all, the frustration he must have felt. And yet there he is sitting there every single day listening to this garbage. And then what does he do? He goes out afterwards. He talks to the press. He talks to them on the way in, on the way out. You've got to give this guy a lot of credit. In between being at the courthouse, he is going to bodegas in Harlem. He's delivering pizzas to the FDNY firefighters. He's holding rallies with 25,000 people in the deep blue Bronx, New York. It's amazing to see, and I have to give him so much credit for doing it. So it was an honor to be there by his side. We'll continue to be there as a family to support him through whatever they might throw his way. But truly, just an incredible time in our history, and what a stain on the history of America that we have reached this point, truly, in our country. I don't think anyone ever expected it.
Well, it's going to backfire on him in a spectacular way. You can feel it. You can see it.
Greg Kelly, host of Greg Kelly Reports with Lara Trump, co-chair of the RNC. Greg said it's going to backfire in a spectacular way. Rob Schmitt, host of Schmitt Tonight, spoke with some people outside the New York City courthouse yesterday.
The establishment sending the number 3 man at DOJ to New York to help throw Trump in prison for the bookkeeping equivalent of a parking ticket is frankly outrageous. You think there's got to be some people on this jury that can see that. And the polls indicate millions of people, including most independent voters, agree with that analysis. Earlier today, I spoke to a New Yorker who says he did not vote for Trump in 2020 or 2016, but he showed up today at court, which is just a few blocks from his Lower Manhattan apartment, to observe this political hit job for himself. Take a listen.
I think it's a little ridiculous that in a city where you won't lock up a common criminal, you're going to put a guy who's running for president through all this all this crap where, months before he's running for president, it just so happened to occur to you that maybe he committed some crimes. I didn't vote for him the past 2 elections, I'll be honest. And when I say I'm a supporter, I'm somebody who doesn't support every single thing he says or even does. But at this point, they got me to a place where I will pull the lever for this guy because, what they're doing to him is disgusting. And I think the person we have in office right now is incompetent.
They've taken it too far to where they've awakened independent minds like yourself.
Sure. I think this backfired on them completely because, I think they're kind of crapping their pants a little bit because this has made him more appealing to someone like me, and even people who I talk to on a daily basis who may not even like him as a person, but the idea of him being perhaps thrown in jail would be crazy. Like, what kind of country is this?
There's a lot of people outside of that courthouse. They're not all just full-on MAGA. There's a lot of independent voters. And right there, that is what they did not expect. But the Biden camp should have known. You can't run this country into the ground intentionally for 3.5 years, earn the worst approval rating in American history, and then expect a politicized legal assault to carry the nearly lifeless body of your candidate across the finish line in November. The American people won't stand for this. Had Biden actually run the country well, had he actually helped unite Americans and had sensible legislation rather than divide us and tear us apart and tear the country apart, well, the scheme that they're pushing right now, this obvious legal scheme, it might have worked. But that's not what they did. Instead, they spent 3 years dividing the country, race baiting, sicking the DOJ on conservatives. coordinating a vast legal assault on a former president, and then to add insult to injury, he sent his campaign out to mock Trump while he suffered under their coordinated legal assault, making T-shirts mocking his only weekday free from trial. This is what the campaign is doing in this moment. Free on Wednesdays as a T-shirt that they're selling.
That is Rob Schmitt, host of Rob Schmitt Tonight, 7 o'clock Eastern on Newsmax. Very interesting comments from the independent voter, right? The latest presidential poll released yesterday by YouGov shows 8% of independent voters voting for the independent candidate, RFK Jr., 24% voting for Biden, and 37% for Trump. 37% of independent voters who are going to be the deciding factor in the election say they're voting for Trump. And a lot of it is because of what they are seeing, like that guy that Rob spoke with. Now, you have to remember, the average person, the everyday Joe, they don't pay nearly as much attention to politics as you do, but they are starting to pay attention to what's going on with Trump and what's going on in the country, and they don't like it. Speaking of dividing the country, this is President Biden campaigning in Philadelphia yesterday.
I'll be damned if I can let Donald Trump turn America into a place filled with anger and resentment and hate.
I mean, is that funny or what? And of course, there was this.
They're trying to erase black history. We're going to write black history because it's American history. It's American history.
The president and the first lady traveled from Philly to Delaware last night, where they're spending today and maybe the next few days at their beach home. More from the Right Squad with Chris Plante.
Mother Teresa could not beat these charges. These charges are rigged. The whole thing is rigged. The whole country's a mess. You have a trial like this where the judge is so conflicted he can't breathe. It was all done by Joe Biden. This judge contributed to Joe Biden, and far worse than that, but I'm not allowed to talk about it because I have a gag order. We have a very, very serious problem here. I mean, our country's going bad. November 5th is going to be the most important day in the history of our country. We're going to take back our country from these fascists and these thugs. In the meantime, this trial is rigged. Thank you.
We are here with tonight's squad. Why don't we jump right in? And Mercy, amazing stuff. Now, again, 34 charges,
right.
felony charges, could be 4 years per charge, which leads to a whole lot of years. But somehow they put a max of 20 years on this thing. And the Democrats are really hoping that they're going to have him in handcuffs and in jail because this is the Democrats inflicting politics.
Right. It's the Democrats' playbook, right? It's you basically activate these very overzealous and political judges and these prosecutors to go after a former president, and it's just absolutely disgusting. I will tell you that when you're looking at what the judge has done, Judge Merchant has done in terms of the jury instructions, where it doesn't have to be unanimous. And talking to prosecutors and judges, they've told me that they have not seen a case like this before, that you should not be allowed in the court for that to happen. And so it really is setting it up so that the jury is in a position where there is more of a likelihood that President Trump would be guilty. But here's the deal. You know what we're not talking about? Joe Biden. Like, Joe Biden's in Pennsylvania. Nobody knows. Nobody cares. So from a PR perspective, from a media perspective, I think it's actually benefited President Trump because people are looking at this and saying, this is outrageous. This is political persecution against President Trump. And I think it's backfiring on Joe Biden because you don't even hear about what Joe Biden is doing these days.
But it also reminds people of the chaos of the Trump years where he was the center of every story. People would wake up to tweets. People in the White House would not even know if they had jobs sometimes because he would just change personnel and policies. And so the fact that it came to this ultimate point where he is literally having to go to a trial for 34 criminal charges. You don't see Joe Biden getting these types of charges. And in terms of Michael Cohen, he wanted someone who was a dirty fixer, who was basically his crook. That was Cohen's reputation for a long time, and that is their star witness.
That now the prosecution is using as their star witness, the liar. I mean, you can't, he's not a convincing witness. Neither is Stormy Daniels, who literally, made money off of President Trump.
What about David Pecker, the National Enquirer?
It's not illegal. It's the National Enquirer. It's not illegal.
He was a prosecution witness.
It's not illegal.
That's Chris Plante and the Right Squad with Mercedes Schlapp, Daniel Lippman of Politico, and others, weeknights, 10 o'clock Eastern on Newsmax. Chris Plante and the Right Squad. Check it out. And let's go back to Carl Higbie and Greta Van Susteren as we wrap it up.
Something that's not getting the media attention right now, probably equally as important, or at least it should be, and the media is not paying any attention to it, is Hunter Biden's gun criminal case starts on Monday, and they're just not even talking about it on any other network.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't watch the other networks. Maybe you do, but I'm pretty busy, here at my work. I don't watch that. But I will say that one interesting thing to look for is look at the indictment and see what kind of gun he's charged with. Then look at the photographs I think the New York Post published, and you tell me if that's the same gun. Yep. So Hunter Biden's got a lot of personal problems, and this gun charge. Look, to tell you the truth, I think the gun charge is far less significant than the tax charges, because a lot of Americans would probably be upset about the tax charge. They work very hard and they pay their taxes, and he didn't pay a lot of his taxes. The gun charge, look, the guy's got a drug problem, maybe violated the law, but used prosecutorial judgment. I would actually have not pursued him on that because he's got so many problems. Yeah. I would pursue the tax charges just in a prosecutorial discretion point of view.
Hunter Biden has pleaded not guilty to all 3 felony counts of gun charges, which involved him lying about drug addiction when he purchased the Colt Cobra 38 revolver. If you know anything about guns, go look at the New York Post picture that Greta mentioned. See what you think. The trial starts on Monday. In Wilmington, Delaware, Hunter is expected to be in court for the trial. Maybe Joe is in Delaware this weekend to talk to some more people, like he quietly met with his daughter-in-law, Haley, the widow of Beau, and the ex-girlfriend of Hunter. That's right, he was sleeping with his military hero brother's grieving wife, who, by the way, is a witness in the upcoming trial. And in other news, Secretary of State Blinken in the Czech Republic today to highlight NATO's support for Ukraine against Russia.
This is critical. By the end of the year, we anticipate that effort, led by Czechia, will produce nearly 1 million shells for Ukraine.
Blinken said Czech officials have been going around the world to help find the munitions Ukrainians need to maintain the battle against Russia. Yesterday, I mentioned Scott Peterson, the guy convicted of killing his wife Lacey and their unborn child more than 20 years ago, a case that had taken the country by storm. Well, the effort to exonerate Peterson came up short again yesterday. California judge denied a request for new DNA testing on all but one of 14 items, saying the evidence presented wasn't enough to warrant a retest of the items. They were looking for some new DNA technology that Peterson's team said would exonerate him from the murder. All right, make sure you keep up with all of the news all day long, and we could have some breaking news at any moment on Newsmax, Newsmax Plus, and at Newsmax.com. I'm Tony Marino. Thank you for listening to the Newsmax Daily. As always, enjoy the rest of your day and keep on fighting the good fight.
News breaks every minute, every day. You need the app, the Newsmax app. Find it free on your smartphone store. Then watch us anytime, anywhere.
It's our America. We conquered it. We built it. Great values like honesty and fairness. Great courage. A great nation needs a free press. Newsmax is it. 30 million Americans regularly go to Newsmax when they really need to know. They watch Newsmax TV at home. On the free Newsmax app, they go to Newsmax.com. Start today. Newsmax is real news for real people.